This video will show you how to create and modify a graph in Excel. So we have experimental data right now, and so what I'm going to do is I want to graph the average period of the pendulum versus the mass. So mass was my independent variable that I chose, that we chose as a class individually, and the average period was what we measured. We ran 3 trials and divided our trials out to find the average single period. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click just to the right, and then I'm going to insert a scatter plot. Because this is scattered data, we need a scatter plot for it. We're not exactly sure if there's even a relationship. So we want a scatter plot with no lines, and you'll notice that I got a whole bunch of data. Excel tried to choose data for me here, and it didn't really know what it was doing, and that's fine. You may have gotten a graph that is completely blank, and if that's the case, I'll let you know where to pick up. If you got a whole bunch of data, you're going to have to right click and hit select data, and even if your graph is blank, you'll want to do that. If you already have data there, you'll want to remove it all. So I removed all 9 sets. If you didn't have any data, yours will already be blank. At this point, no matter what your situation with the graph, you'll click Add Data. If you want to include a series name, you could do so. You could call it mass data or something else that describes the series of data that we're selecting. But you don't need anything because we're only graphing one set of data on this graph. And our titles will tell us what the data is. Our x values, I'll click in that box. Our x values in math, you may recall that those are on the horizontal axis, and those are typically what you're given. You're told x equals 5, find y, or x equals 3, find y. In this case, in science, our x values are our independent variable. So these are the values for mass. So I go to mass and I click and I drag while my cursor is in series x values, and now it has selected my independent variable data. I then click in the series y values and remove that data, or what was in that box originally. And the y values, just like in math, that's your vertical axis. That is our dependent variable. So once I've clicked in series y values box, I'll click and drag and select all of the data for average period. I'll hit OK twice, and you'll notice as I scroll over, we have a bunch of data that looks like it's all over the place. But you'll notice that the vertical axis is extremely zoomed in. I go from 1.4 to 1.6, and in fact, I'm so zoomed in that the same value occupies multiple grid lines. So the first order of business is to go to Chart Tools at the top in your menu and hit Layout and go to the axes. And because it's our vertical axis that's giving us problems, I'll go to Vertical Axis and more vertical axis options. Excel automatically chose my minimum and maximum. Because we had this issue, I'm going to automatically choose, or I'm going to fix my choice. And so for my minimum, I'm going to choose 0 because we're somewhat near 0. And for my maximum, most of my values, I think all my values are under 1.6, but I don't want all my points at the top of the graph, so I'll choose 20 or 2 as my maximum. Now it starts to look pretty similar. I can remove my legend because that's not telling me anything. If you had included a series name in there, that would appear, but I didn't. So now in order to make this a proper graph, I need to label things. So first thing I'll do is I will label my horizontal axis. So I go up into Chart Layout, Title, Axis Titles, Primary Horizontal Axis, Title Below Axis. This was my independent variable, so that's going to be mass, and my units were kilograms. I always want the units down there. I'm going to go back to Axes Titles and Vertical Title, and it doesn't really matter which one you choose as long as it's legible. I'll choose the horizontal version. And my vertical, or my dependent variable, was period, and that was measured in seconds. Okay, so now I have Axes Titles, and the last thing to do is include a chart title. So again, back up to Chart Tools Layout, and in Chart Title, I can put the title. In this case, I'm going to put it above the graph. Safe bet is I can always call this my dependent variable, period, versus my independent mass. As long as the title explains what is contained in this graph, that's the most important thing. You can never really go wrong by just labeling it the dependent variable versus the independent variable. Almost ready to finish up. Since we have 2 more graphs to make, what I'm going to do is I'm going to utilize the formatting that I did, because I don't want to have to start from square one every time. And I'm just going to copy my chart, my graph, click down here, and I'm going to paste that. And in this case, I'll just Control V. Now, this second graph is not going to chart period versus mass. It's actually going to be period versus displacement. And so I'll need to change the title. I'll need to change my axis title. But you can tell this is a lot faster. Displacement was in degrees. And now I need to change the data. If you recall, we selected data, so I right-click on the graph and hit Select Data. And notice, if I right-click inside the data, I'm going to get other options, but usually it'll still give me a chance to select the data. I'll remove the old data, which is for our previous experiment, and I'm going to add a new set. Again, we don't need the series name, but my x values here, my independent variable, was my displacement angle. So I'll highlight those, I'll go into series y values, and I'll select 1 period average, hit OK twice, and here is my data. Now again, I get pretty flat data. So for these, I'm going to go back up to my mass. It's always nice to include a trend line, and I've identified that the trend is, I think it's a linear trend. So I can go into trend line in chart tool layout and hit linear trend line. And the trend line is a line of best fit, and I can actually double click on it, and I can display the equation and also the r-squared value if I want. But the equation, you'll notice, says y equals mx plus b, in this case 0.0115x, x being mass and y being period, which is usually abbreviated with a capital T. My slope here is extremely small, and that says that the relationship between period and mass is small, and in this case I would be able to argue that it's a result of error. If you do the same with period versus displacement, again I suspect linear. There's my trend line. If I go into the trend line options and display the equation, I see that there's also a small correlation.